Yes, moderator, Mr. President, ministers, ladies and gentlemen. I'm especially happy to be here with you today. I've had a long-standing sort of relationship with Greenland. My talk is going to be mostly concerned with best practices, how to guarantee that those who come here in order to take on big developments always follow the best handbook available on how to do this in a sustainable manner in accordance with the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, in harmony with the environment, and in good cooperation with the locals. But first, I wanted to introduce myself a little bit and what awoke my interest in Greenland. I'm born in Iceland, and I'm Icelandic, but what basically took me for the first time to Greenland was not something that I heard in Iceland. I was actually working in New York on Wall Street, and there my friends were eager to ski somewhere exotic. And they said, well, why don't we ski in Greenland? And we started thinking about it. These were former professional skiers. They had competed in Olympics, won medals, but they weren't really sure how to maneuver on ice or how to survive on a glacier. So they thought I would be a local sort of partner to take along, knowing everything about this. But in reality, I had never really given much thought to Greenland, and I had never thought about skiing there, but their ambitions were high. They said, well, there's a big peak in Greenland called Gudjonsson, and nobody has ever skied it, so we should go there. But like in all sort of expeditions, you have to tread carefully. You have to take one step at a time. So what we decided to do was to first do an experimental trip to Eykon. And there we went with the polar bear hunters on their sleds with all their equipment into the glacier and stayed there for 2 weeks. But of course we found out that this exploratory trip was highly prudent because my friends from New York, when I had sent them an equipment list of what to bring, they brought what they thought was the right thing. For instance, they would bring yoga mattresses instead of insulation mattresses and things in that manner. So when I looked into the tents, I was sleeping next to one in a tent, and the day after he started to try to get out, he was like this far below myself. He had sunk well into the ground and was freezing cold. We went on another exploratory trip, and we were all totally fascinated by the country. And finally, in 2006, we were able to ski Gudjonsson. And that was a challenging expedition, but went very well. After that, my friends in Iceland have given me a nickname, and I'm called the Greenlander, because I'm the one there in our sort of group of friends that I'm the only one that have been here. But what I'm doing, basically, is that I have a very keen interest in the Arctic, and I have a business background, and I work in oil exploration. So I'm the chairman of an Icelandic-Norwegian oil exploration company. And we're doing oil exploration east of Iceland with, for instance, Petoro, the Norwegian state oil company, and CNOOC, the Chinese national offshore oil company. And what I wanted to mention here is that international cooperation is essential. We can see that in the history of Greenland, and we can see it clearly in the history of Iceland. Just prior to this session, there was a gentleman from Air Greenland going through how that good company was established back in the days. It was through a cooperation with SAS and some international investors. But how do you guarantee that there is a favorable outcome of a collaboration like this? How do you guarantee that there's a transfer of knowledge so that the locals will always participate, the locals will benefit, and there will be a new industry that comes out of this collaboration? If we look, for instance, towards Iceland, the fishing sector in Iceland is quite developed, but it wasn't like that 100 years ago. There were basically Scottish brothers that came to Hafnarfjörður, close to Reykjavik, and with their international trawlers. Icelanders had been using boats with oars and had never been able to use trawls. So the Icelanders learned the tricks from the Scots and eventually were able to buy their own trawlers and foster a new, very competitive industry. The same holds true for hydropower generation in Iceland. There were Swedish engineers and Swedish construction companies that came to Iceland, hired locals to help them out, and out of that came a new industry, a knowledge industry in the power sector. What we're hoping, of course, to achieve in Iceland now with the oil exploration is that this transfer of knowledge takes place once more, and we can be a real force in servicing and operating within a new industry. But why are these industries important? And why is it important to have many different industries? We all know that in order to attain international living standards, we need to be able to export. We need to export in order to be able to import. So to have international living standards, we have to have a good business relationship with the international companies, the international business community. And in order not to be too contingent or too dependent on one industry, one export, we need to diversify. So the oil industry in Iceland could actually become the fourth pillar of the economy if things go as planned. Here in Greenland, you have amazing opportunities. But as I said with my ski story before, one has to tread carefully, one has to go and do things step by step, not try to make giant leaps, but take careful steps one at a time. So what I wanted to show you is something that very good people, a good group of different people have been working on now for almost 2 years. It's called the Arctic Investment Protocol. And so basically it's quite simple. It came about in such a manner that there were interest groups, people that have both direct interests and also just curious interests in the Arctic that sat around. These were people, scientists, environmentalists, businesses, indigenous people, and others. And they thought to themselves, how can we guarantee that future developments will be handled in the best possible manner? They drew, of course, on previous work that had been done by the United Nations, like the Sustainable Development Goals that have been set there, but also came up with a more sort of local take on things. So I'm not going to read through these 6 points, but what I think they sort of crystallize very well is that there is a huge need for a local participation in big developments. We need to guarantee that this transfer of knowledge that I mentioned earlier takes place. With that, we can create a more diversified economy, a more interesting economy, because we have to face it in global competition. The biggest competition is not for money or ideas, it's for people. So to attract the best people, to keep the best people, to be able to use the talents of our own population, we need to have a diversified economy that's developing constantly. So I'm going to leave you with that and look forward to the discussions later on. Thank you.